aspect to it and an economic aspect that made relationships between the two very difficult. The Jewish tribes were unable to accept Muhammad as the apostle of God because that went against their scripture and their tradition and so on. So there's a fundamental problem there. But the other thing was just control of trade and resources. There's a lot of struggle for the control of the economy, if you like, the silver market and metalwork and things like that. The newly arrived followers of Muhammad from Mecca were keen to dominate the local economy.
The more powerful and successful Muhammad became, the more his relations with the Jewish tribes worsened. He expected their support in his conflict with Mecca, but they had lucrative commercial ties with the Quraysh in Mecca, which they were not about to give up. And so, according to Muslim tradition, the Jewish tribes began to have secret meetings with Muhammad's enemies. Some of the pagan tribes that had converted to Islam also started to resent Muhammad's success, and they too began to turn against him. Muhammad now faced a dual threat from both inside and outside his own ranks. It wasn't long after the Battle of Badr that Muhammad began to encounter his first serious problems with the Jewish tribes from Medina. He learned of a series of secret meetings between the Jewish tribes and his Quraysh enemies from Mecca. Muhammad's fear was that if the Quraysh attacked, the Jewish tribes may well swap sides wholesale and help to crush him, and thus he felt he had to act. He surrounded one of the villages of the Jewish tribe south of Medina, and after a 2-week siege, they surrendered and then they were banished en masse from Medina.
Part of the Constitution of Medina had been a compact in which people of different tribes and faiths could live together, that Jews had a right to live and function within the society commercially, to practice their faith, but that what they owed the state was their loyalty. And what happens at a certain point is that the Jews, not all of the Jews, but particular groups of Jews, are seen as, in effect, committing treason, as aligning themselves and making vulnerable the Medinan community, aligning themselves with the enemy.
The exact nature of the relationship between Muhammad and the Jewish tribes is another controversial aspect of his life. Most Muslim scholars regard the Constitution of Medina as a formal treaty between the two, and that when some of the Jewish tribes met with Muhammad's enemies, they broke that treaty. Others dispute this interpretation. You speak about controversies or differences of opinion about the Treaty of Medina. Spell it out.
This is a dispute that I don't think historians can solve. It's interesting that we don't really have any reliable, independent, contemporary Jewish sources for this. So you can take the view that they did enter into a treaty and then they broke it, or you can take the view that the treaty was a Muslim chronicler's invention in order to justify ex post facto what had happened.
There's a spark of realpolitik, of power politics, by expelling these very wealthy communities who had put themselves, in each case, in a treasonable situation. On one level, the Prophet came with a whole lot of penniless migrant refugees, and certainly when the first Jewish clan who owned all this property, owned all the valleys, when they had broken the pact and negotiated with an outsider, they meant the whole point of him coming to Medina was that he was going to be the chair and stop all of this schism.
At that time, the acceptable punishment for treason was death. So the fact that Muhammad only banished this Jewish tribe from Medina might suggest he was still hoping for some kind of reconciliation with the others. But relations between the two sides remained fraught. Another event was to increase the tension even more. Almost exactly a year after the Battle of Badr, the Quraysh returned to Medina looking for vengeance with a new army 3 times larger than Muhammad's. This was no longer a tribal squabble, but an all-out war of extermination. Once again, Muhammad decided to meet the Meccan forces outside of the oasis here at Mount Uhud. But his forces were greatly depleted. For one thing, the Jewish tribes decided not to fight because it was the Sabbath. And one of Muhammad's commanders deserted him, taking 300 soldiers with him. The Meccans, on the other hand, were motivated by the desire for vengeance. This time, neither side was able to deliver a crushing blow, and the battle ended in a stalemate.
It was a hard-fought battle. It was a draw, if you like. But the important thing was that the Muslim community of Muhammad in Medina survived.
The crucial difference was that this time the Meccans had some inside help. According to Muslim tradition, some of the Jewish tribes in Medina were now actively helping Muhammad's enemies. The third and final battle took place in 627 AD, 5 years after Muhammad had moved to Medina, when the Quraysh returned with a massive army of 10,000 warriors. Muhammad could only muster a force of 3,000, and so this time there was no question of him facing the Quraysh in open battle. So he decided to fortify Medina against a siege. Medina was relatively easy to defend because it's surrounded by volcanic hills, but its most vulnerable point was to the north. And so Muhammad adopted a very simple tactic. He dug a huge trench, and its effects on the Quraysh advance was dramatic. This area of present-day modern Medina is where the so-called Battle of the Trench took place. Over there was the Meccan army, and over there was the Muslim army, and the trench dividing the two forces. The Meccan army was said to be so large that it covered an area as far as the eye could see, but thus began what must have been an incredibly strange standoff. The Meccan army was absolutely unable to do anything. They didn't have any siege equipment in which to get over this trench that Muhammad and his forces had built. For his part, Muhammad was quite prepared to sit and wait and allow the Meccans to get frustrated and leave.
Digging a trench meant that the horses of the Meccans couldn't enter the city. And it's been taken by Muslims through the centuries as a sign of Muhammad's astuteness in ordering and commanding this different sort of defense, which caught the Meccans off guard. It meant that the strategies or the tactics that they were pursuing didn't work.
According to Muslim tradition, after 2 weeks, the Meccan supplies were starting to run out. So they asked their new secret ally, one of the Jewish tribes, the Banu Qurayza, to attack the Muslim forces from within the city. Whereas before Jewish tribes had only traded with Muhammad's enemies or refused to take up arms in support of Muhammad, this time they were now on the verge of actually attacking him.
The Qurayza were inside Medina with Muhammad and the Muslims, and they had an accord with Muhammad and the Muslims. But after they had seen what had happened to the other two Jewish tribes of Medina, the Nadir and the Kainuka, they, understandably, I think, reached out to the Quraysh and offered to make an accord with them against Muhammad.
So you have these people, part of the alliance of Medina, siding with the most bitter enemy to finish off the Muslim community. That was high treason because the Muslims, as the Quran tells us, were shaken to the foundation and thinking that it is khalas, the end is nigh.
Muslim scholars claim that at the very least, the Banu Qurayza betrayed Muhammad by negotiating with the Quraysh and being on the brink of attacking the Muslim forces, even though the Quraysh and their allies withdrew before this attack could take place.
That's the traditional explanation. He was betrayed. There is, by the way, no record of any actual attack of the Jews against the Prophet or anything like that. Now, during this siege, the Qurayza lent weapons to the Prophet. On the other hand, they probably also traded with the besiegers because they were traders.
I think the Banu Qurayza probably did side with the Quraysh. I think this would have been a natural thing for them to have done. Jews are always looking for allies. In the diaspora, a cornerstone of Jewish political theory has been you meet and make friends with everyone that you can meet and make friends with. And I think this would have been absolutely natural for them to have done this.
if this plot had succeeded, the Quraysh would have been able to enter Medina, they would have slaughtered Muhammad and all of his followers, and his attempts to start this new religion would have come to a halt. His reaction to this latest act of treachery would lead to one of the most controversial incidents in his entire life.
Muhammad ordered his army to surround the village of the Jewish tribe. They held out for 25 days before surrendering. He now faced a dilemma. If he allowed them to go free, they could join the Quraysh in Mecca and help them to crush him. Rather than make the decision himself, Muhammad agreed that an independent arbiter be appointed. He allowed the Jewish tribal leaders to choose a respected local leader to arbitrate and pronounce judgment.
It was the third time he was meeting some of the people and say, I'm going now to ask someone to judge you. Are you happy with this? And he asked Sa'd ibn Mu'adh to come and to decide. He decided that the man should be killed. And before this, the Prophet said, I'm not going to judge, I'm going to ask someone. The point is for us here is to acknowledge two things. First, it happened that men were killed, but in a situation where he spared the life of the people 2 times before, and this was the last time, and say, this is enough, because you are continuing, even though we are sparing your life, to attack us in a way which was betraying us.
He said all the fighters amongst Banu Qurayza should be put to the sword, and the women and children should be taken as captives. This is what happened. They were executed.
This is the first Holocaust against the Jews. How can a prophet order a massacre of 800 men? Even if they tried to kill him, he could have banished them or he could have moved.
It had nothing to do with the fact that they were Jews. They could have been a Christian tribe or any other tribe. It wasn't a Holocaust. It wasn't directed at the Jews because of their religion. If that was the case, then it would have set a precedent in Muslim history, and we would not have found the golden age of Jewish enlightenment taking place under the Muslims in Spain. If this claim was true, then we would have found the position of Jews throughout Islamic history would have been very, very different.
It's this incident, perhaps more than any other, that's led many critics to brand Muhammad as a bloodthirsty tyrant, willing to use all violent means in order to maintain his rule. And it's also seen as the origins for much of the hostility in the Islamic world today towards Jews. And certainly, judging by our own standards today, it was an appalling act of brutality. But we have to see it within the context of the time. The fact that very few people were shocked by this act is a stark reminder of the brutality of the age and society in which Muhammad grew up.
I think that the massacre at that time had an impact on the outlook of Islam towards the Jewish world. I think over the centuries since then, the Islamic world has, in a sense, bought into a particular view of Jews. Now, having said that, I think there are other factors that have influenced Islamic attitudes towards Jews. But I think that was certainly one of them. I think it seared itself into the Muslim historical memory. And to that extent, it has had an impact that we feel down to this day.
In some parts of the Muslim world and Muslim communities in the West, a new anti-Semitism has appeared that claims legitimacy from the Quran. Its offensive rants are to most Muslim and non-Muslim ears completely abhorrent.
أيا يهود ألا لعنة الله عليكم أيا يهود اللهم أنزل عليهم سخطك ورجزك وعذابك.
All the people who are confusing some of the historical events with taking a position against the Jews only because they are Jews are not respecting the Islamic tradition. This is unacceptable, this is racism, this is anti-Semitism, this is against our religion. We can't at the same time say, hum min ahl al-kitab, that they are people of the book and they are following the monotheistic tradition, and at the same time have racist statements just targeting the Jews, while the Prophet, when he arrived in Medina, and this is something which is very important for us, when he started this Islamic society with the rules, he spoke about al-Ummah al-Islamiyya, the community, and he said, Hum min ummatina, they are members of our Ummah. Who? The Jews and the Christians. So how come he's saying this, and now we come with these statements that are completely unacceptable from an Islamic viewpoint, and we are confusing what a state, a government can do, for example in the Middle East, with what the Jews are. The Jews are our brothers and sisters in faith and humanity.
The legacy of Muhammad's treatment of the Jewish tribes in Medina is still with us today, but at the time it saw him emerge as the leader of a powerful new movement in Arabia that was gaining in confidence. But would this be his only legacy? He was now in his late 50s and for most of his life had had to face brutal persecution. He'd been forced out of his hometown and was engaged in almost continual bloody conflict. In particular, Muhammad had to resolve this struggle for supremacy with the Meccans. Would that end in yet more violence, or could he find a safer future for his followers? In essence, would Muhammad be remembered as a leader and warrior who conquered Arabia, or as a prophet with a wider message for the entire world?
In the next and final part, Muhammad faces his enemies one more time and wins, but through peace. And he outlines his legacy in a final sermon in Mecca.
The Prophet's final sermon sets the agenda for modern, contemporary Muslim society. It shows where we've failed, and it shows where we have to try to get to. It sums up the transformative mission that was the life of the Prophet.
And the life of Muhammad continues here on BBC HD next Monday at 9. Next this evening, though, it's a difficult time for jazz in Small Teen, Bigger World.